What up, perps? Kid Copious back in effect. Purple State Party. You know what we're doing here? We're repping America, the center, common sense. Recording on a Sunday today, not feeling too great. Not the best couple days for me, but I'm not going to get into that. Yeah, let's get this going. So last week, as I was getting ready to record, news of the U.S.-Israeli attack on Iran broke. One of the odd stories that I found was that Israel actually hacked into Tehran's traffic cameras to track Khomeini, and then we just flattened him. Sent a bunch of drones, U.S. kamikaze drones, and then we spent about $10 million to blow him off the face of the earth. Money well spent. Epic fury, man. This has been a long time coming. This has been since 1979. In 1979, the Islamic fundamentalist rallied the left and the communists against the monarchy, the Shah, and overthrew him and took a bunch of Americans hostage at a college. And that went on for something like 444 days, I believe, until Reagan took office and Iran knew, oh, crap, the gig's up. Because just like under Biden, Jimmy Carter was a soft liberal. He was. I mean, Biden gave back money to Iran, and Iran gave that money to terrorists. I mean, we know this is what happens, And, the odd thing is right now they're discussing whether or not Khomeini, the dead Ayatollah, if his son's going to take over. Back in 1979, their whole chants were against the monarchy, but yet it looks like it might just be his son taking over, continuing the monarchy. People just abandon their ideals so quickly. And also in 1979, when the Ayatollah Khomeini took over, a lot of those very same leftists and those Marxists and those communists were jailed and or executed. They were useful idiots. And that's what we're seeing right now. The Democratic Party is using a bunch of useful idiots to cause a bunch of problems. And people want to say, oh, well, what did Iran do? Blah, 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 blah. We shouldn't be doing this. But, as soon as we attacked, Iran started attacking Israel. They also attacked the United Arab Emirates. They attacked Saudi Arabia. They even attacked Cyprus. Go figure that. They're pretending as though this was an unjustified attack, and they're just retaliating. But, at the end of the day, it was not an unprovoked attack. Okay? We know this. Iran is crippled right now. We took out their Air Force. We took out their air defenses. We even took out their Navy. Unbelievably, an Iranian ship was over by Sri Lanka taking part in some war games with India. I don't know how that all came about, but that's what was going on. And one of our submarines launched a torpedo and sank an Iranian ship. That is the first time since World War II. That's longer than most of our lifetimes ago. That's what we are bringing to bear on Iran right now. This is no holds barred. This has been a long time coming. And I'm so happy and grateful that Trump's going after this guy and going after this country. Whenever the U.S. gets involved in the Middle East, especially in Iraq, we look to our sort of Kurdish, allies over there. I don't know if they're allies. They have their own self-interest, and that's fine. But, the Kurds are basically have a territory called Kurdistan, and it's divided between Turkey, Iran, Syria, and Iraq. And at one point it was in the Soviet Union, but the Soviet Union dissolved that. So now they're just in Iran, Turkey, Iraq, and Syria. They look on a map. Look up Kurdistan. It's fascinating. But they are not these fanatical adherents to the Muslim religion. Many of them are Muslim, but they live with Christians. They live with Jews. They don't have a problem with Israel because their traditional territory, has nothing to do with Israel, so they don't have a beef with Israel. They're based a lot on tribes, so you'll see some differences in how they adhere to different traditions and laws and things like that based on what tribes they're in. But they don't have any say in the overall affairs of the countries they're in because they are a minority. They are literally the largest nationality without a sovereign land. People who are Turkish, they live in Turkey, English lives in England, Irish lives in Ireland, Italians live in Italy. But the Kurds basically live in this divided area. Like I said, Turkey, Iran, Syria, and Iraq. And, they're looking for a fight right now. What they want to do, ultimately, I believe, is to get some independence from Iran, because I think they feel like they could accomplish that. It's sort of like when we were talking about Somaliland, that northern chunk of Somalia that is self-governed and run by their own set of rules. But, in doing my research for this, I came across an article that was titled, "The Kurds Won't Solve the Iran Problem. They're good fighters and good allies, but not the panacea." This is by Mark Hertling. And he just mentions about what I was already talking about. When we went into Iraq, we want the Kurds on our side. They're fierce fighters. They are among the most pro-Western and pro-American groups in the region. They were partners and helped stabilize parts of Iraq during the U.S. invasion. They were decisive in defeating ISIS in the Iraqi state in 2014 and destroying ISIS in Syria. They are basically repulsed by the way these hardline Muslim rulers rule. Depending on what tribe you're in, they don't really do the hijab, but they see things a little bit differently. They're a little bit white. Maybe a good word for them would be moderate Muslims. But in Iran, they only make up about 10% of the people. There's a couple opposition groups there, the Kurdistan Democratic Party and the Kurdistan Free Life Party. Both of them are trying to get independence, at least in that area of Iran where they reside. But we shouldn't think that they're going to become the nucleus for our new government. This is what Mark was saying, because that's not what they want. And he goes on to talk about working with them and understanding their culture and how much they didn't like Saddam Hussein and they don't like some of these other things, these other leaders. They're disciplined fighters. The Peshmerga. It's hard for me to pronounce that word. But they don't have this abstract ideology or loyalty to a distant government in Baghdad when they were in Iraq. They're motivated by something more important, which is the defense of Kurdish land, Kurdish autonomy, and the long-held dream of a Kurdish statehood. So, maybe they're not going to necessarily rally Iranians around them. And I get that. It makes sense. They make up less than 10%, 8 to 10% of the Iranian population. But they are fighters on the ground. They are boots on the ground that we can aid and support and supply that might be able to clean out these pockets of resistance in Iran and return Iran to a more democratic country. I mean, at one point, Iran actually had elections. They've recently had elections, but the Ayatollah basically just voided all that. But the Kurds are an important part of this. They are a very interesting group to study. They are fierce fighters. They're very dedicated to their homeland. And I think that's something that I really admire as, a red-blooded American, as they say. Our country is so important to protect. And that's one of the biggest problems I have with the left. It's very easy to say, oh, the United States is bad, but what do you replace it with? Capitalism is bad, but what do you replace it with? We are humans. There are always going to be imperfections. But enough about that, enough about the Kurds. I hope they can obtain statehood. We've seen in recent years, in the Bill Clinton, Obama administration, we saw some changes in countries Czechoslovakia is no more. Yugoslavia is no more. I think one of the things that we need to do in this country is realize that if you have these two opposing forces that don't get along, maybe don't try to lump them into one country. And, maybe that's what has to happen here. I understand Turkey isn't going to want to give up any of their land to the Kurds, but maybe the Kurds can get a homeland started in Iran. I think they deserve it. When you read about their views on governing and life and things like that, there are people to admire. But all right. I already said I was going to move on, so let's move on to the next thing. All right, so we're going to look at some reactions to the conflict in Iran. I don't really know how it's kind of one-sided at this point, but let's just call it the war in Iran. Hundreds of protesters gathered on Saturday outside Los Angeles City Hall. They brought together our American, Iranian, Arab-speaking participants, and they voiced their opposition through chants, banners, and signs criticizing Trump's government and condemning what they describe as the global community's silence towards the actions of Israel. The left has been conditioned to hate Jews. That's basically what this is. There is no illegal war going on. This is not a war that Trump just woke up one morning and said, you know what, I'm going to cover up the Epstein files by firing missiles into Iran. No, this has been a long simmering problem. These people, the Iranian government, has long chanted death to America and financed anybody who would try to bring death to America or Americans. But they're out there rallying. In Manhattan, of course, they had posters of Ayatollah Khamenei up, and they were having a vigil for this guy. See, the left doesn't even put two and two together. The Ayatollah does not support, never did support anything you believe in. They don't have gay rights. They don't have trans rights. They don't have women's rights. They don't have freedom of speech. Yes, Iran is not like some sort of shithole or a place that I don't even know how to describe it. That's not what it is, okay? This is a very prosperous country, although, surprise, surprise, a lot of people live in poverty over there because the government keeps a lot of money for the government. That's what happens when you have a dictator or an Ayatollah. But a fight broke out because somebody tried to pull down the poster of the dictator, and a guy wearing a SpongeBob sweatshirt punched him in the face. And then the fight broke out, and the NYPD had to intervene. And they're talking about this vigil, a makeshift memorial covered with these scarves and photos of Khamenei, and an observer describing the scene as the People's Republic of New York. Read your history books, lefties. These are the very same people who used you to overthrow the Shah and then threw you in jail. Meanwhile, around there, people were chanting, America, things like that, down with Khamenei. But one of the organizers, or I guess a flyer that they put out, quote, throughout his life, Khamenei defended the dignity of the Iranian people and stood firmly against Zionism and the criminal American regime. Since the Islamic Revolution in 1979 overthrew the U.S.-backed puppet government, the Iranian people have resisted Western domination and the exploitation of their land, labor, and resources. Well, they were exploited by their own leader. They were betrayed by their own leader. Meanwhile, the flyer went on to say, in that time, Iran severed all ties with the Zionist regime and was the first country to host a Palestinian embassy. All the while materially supporting Palestinian resistance and national liberation movements across the world. They funded terrorists. You can rewrite it however you want, but people know. Iranians, by the way, all across, in LA, everywhere, are celebrating this. Because a lot of them, I would dare say, all of the Iranians in the United States and in Britain and in other places around the world fled for one reason or another. They had reasons to leave Iran. Yeah, of course, Mandami, New York's mayor, socialist mayor, condemned the attacks. This is what he had to say. Today's military strikes on Iran, carried out by the U.S. and Israel, mark a catastrophic escalation in an illegal war of aggression. Really? Really? So Iran can launch missiles into Israel and fund terrorist attacks on Israel. And if somebody does something about it, then that's an illegal war of aggression? What about Iran? What has Iran been waging for the last 4 decades? Yeah, an illegal war of aggression. I'm sorry, but if you supply the people who are attacking civilians in Israel, the United States, all around the world, you are part of it, okay? You don't just hand over a bunch of guns and go, oh, I'm innocent of it. Why are people even tolerating this? People should be outraged and protesting against Mandami and other people like that who are sitting here trying to say that the U.S. is wrong. You're mental. You're mental. You have Trump derangement syndrome. You're willing to throw out common sense and common decency because you don't like the guy who ordered it. And of course, our own Senate did the same thing. Chuck Schumer from New York, Adam Schiff from California, Tim Kaine from Virginia. They wanted to stop the war. They wanted to have the say-so in it. They even went so far as to require Congress's explicit approval before future engagements with Iran. Wow. Wow. So, in other words, they want to protect Iran? I mean, because that's what I get out of it. I get the Democrats are so upset at Trump that they're willing to go to these lengths. But when Obama did it, they not a peep. And Obama did do it. Obama flew jets into Syria. Obama flew jets into other places. He bombed other places. Whatever. So President Trump said Wednesday afternoon, we're doing very well on the war front, to put it mildly. If he was asked on a scale of 1 to 10, how did he rate the U.S. military operation? He rated it a 15. And yes, lives have been lost, okay? As somebody who signed up for the military at a young age, was not able to go in because my parents would not sign, I know what that means. These are soldiers who have, signed up to give their life for their country. Iran has spent 4 decades chanting death to America, funding those who would try and rewarding those who did. They directly fund Hamas, Hezbollah, Houthis, and other groups. Look it up. The top 10 terror organizations are all Muslim extremists, and they all receive funds or weapons or support from Iran. Iran would attack America if they even had a remote chance of succeeding. So they pick us off one by one overseas. They blow up embassies and stuff like that. So while I mourn for these families, I feel bad for these families who lost loved ones already in the conflict. But you know what you're signing up for. You know you might have to lay your life on the line for your country. And I believe that this war, unlike, we can argue Afghanistan, Iraq, we can argue Korea and Vietnam, okay? Those are gray areas. Those are very gray areas. But this is black and white. Iran is trying to get a nuclear weapon. Iran is funding terror. Iran is not somebody that we need having any power in this world unless they are going to be ruled by people who are moderate, who try to live with their neighbors and try to live in this global community that we're building. And speaking of the global community, unbelievably, the Canadian PM came out in favor of these strikes. But what he said was so relevant. His country has long seen Iran as a principal source of instability and terror in the Middle East, the Canadian Prime Minister noted. And that, despite more than 2 decades of negotiations and diplomatic efforts, Iran has not dismantled its nuclear program, nor halted its enrichment activities. Canada stands with the Iranian people in their long and courageous struggle against the regime's oppressive rule, he went on to say. which is why we support efforts to prevent Iran from obtaining a nuclear weapon and to prevent its regime from further threatening international peace and security. Because Canada is actively taking on the world as it is, not passively waiting for the world we wish it to be. Yeah. He concluded, we do, however, take this position with regret because the current conflict is another example of the failure of international order. How am I agreeing with the Prime Minister of Canada? The UN is feckless. They are. We have tried our best with Iran. They still want to go ahead. But somehow he had the balls to stand up and just say it. Say, this is the world we live in. It is sometimes an ugly world and it needs ugly solutions. Liberals operate on feelings. It feels good. Despite failures, they just continue because it feels good. It's not a smart way of doing things. And they simply oppose good actions if the wrong people do it. Obama built the cages for the kids coming across the border. Obama used the military multiple times without approval. They have DAs and mayors and governors that are just soft on crime, soft on the homeless. Look at Gabby Newsom. They blow their budgets on things like DEI and green movements. But nothing gets accomplished. In 3 months of 2026, Trump got Maduro, who was under indictment for drug dealing. He assisted the Mexicans in getting the head of the New Generation cartel, and now he's flattened the Ayatollah of Iran. He is doing things. And oddly enough, NPR had to kind of agree. This correspondent, Aidar Peralta, went to Venezuela. He said, it's absolutely surreal because you land at an airport and the signs are in Spanish, Russian, Arabic, and Chinese, which tells you just where this country was facing a few months ago. And then you go out on the streets and people here tell you they feel like a weight has been lifted. Opposition groups are rebuilding. People are smiling again down there. And, like Peralta says, the minerals in your laptop, for example. He says Venezuela likely has those minerals. American companies would like to extract them, and Venezuela could suddenly become key in helping U.S. break reliance on China. A win-win, he called it. And yesterday, Trump said, quote, Venezuela is working. Once again, he was framing it as a model for regime change. Countries that have bad leaders don't contribute to the global economy. They hurt their own citizens, and they drive illegal immigration as people have to flee. Trump's getting things done, and the liberals just can't stand it. Because we spent 4 years under Biden making a fucking mess. A lot of the things that Biden is credited with never actually happened. High-speed internet, the car chargers, that stuff didn't happen. He didn't unite us like he said he would. He opened up the border, which has just caused all kinds of pain and suffering. Trump has gotten stuff done. We need to break away from China. And if Venezuela could be a key cog in that, great. And if knocking out Iran further kind of decouples us from China, let's go for it. So this last thing I want to bring you is, I take care of fire alarms. I know the power of fire. And it scares me that we import so much cheap shit from China that does what these articles are going to point out. Solar light causes fire that engulfs Tennessee home in 20 minutes. Yeah, inside those solar-powered lights are lithium-ion batteries. He tried. He saw like that the lights had caught the back deck on fire. He grabbed a fire extinguisher, knocked the fire down, and then it just jumped 12 feet onto his roof because it's all being fueled by that. He lost everything. Him and his wife and his grandson managed to escape with only the clothes on their back. Everything they owned was ash. This was a $20 pack of lights with no warning labels. They were bought on Amazon under the name WDT Pro model TL012, outdoor solar light, waterproof. The listing didn't mention that they contained lithium-ion batteries. They contain no UL, ETL, or CSA certification, meaning they had never been tested by a recognized safety laboratory. That's what China does. When I was doing fire extinguishers, we got alerts that the Chinese were selling high-pressure containers that had been illegally stamped, that they were pressure tested. You know what happens when you take a metal cylinder and pressurize it, and it's not meant to take that pressure? It's called a hand grenade. A 92-year-old woman in New Jersey died, and 2 others were hospitalized. Again, lithium-ion batteries. They're in smartphones, laptops, tablets, medical devices, power tools. They're in those electric scooters. Think about it. Your kid is banging that scooter around, and then he brings it in, he puts it by your front door. Lithium-ion batteries can overheat, catch on fire, and even explode when damaged or improperly used, charged, or stored. And this comes from the NFPA, National Fire Protection Association. That's the thing that people in my field, we all have to get certified, we all have to study, we all have to know. The NFPA. Yeah. Don't expose them to extreme heat or cold because this can make them brittle, meaning they can break more easily and go into thermal runaway. That's fucking scary. Those scooters out there, I've talked about this before, but it really concerns me. And now we've got the problem of just solar lights. I have solar lights all around my house. They light my walkways. I have them decorative and I have them for practical applications. I got to think about where they are now. I got to start pulling some of them down, moving them away from the house. Because these batteries just can explode. They can literally just cause a fire. You know, we don't use them in regular gas-powered cars. We use sealed lead acid. It's pretty safe. I wouldn't want to drink it or get too much of it on me. But that's what we use in real cars. They even use them in a lot of electric cars to start the vehicle. Why? Because they don't suffer from the climate. Those batteries, the ones that you have in your normal gas-operated vehicle, can start at very low temperatures and very high temperatures. They can't do thermal runaway. They're not designed that way. The chemical compositions, blah, 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 blah. It doesn't work that way. But we're just going to race right into it because we seem to think that electric-powered cars are going to save the planet. They're not. Lithium is not a good substance. When you make it into a battery, it's susceptible to getting cracked and lighting on fire. Right now, most electric vehicles are totaled when they're in an accident because no insurance company and repair shop really wants to take responsibility for saying, yes, your car is fine. And then it just ignites because of a hairline fracture in the battery, a microfracture in the battery. This is temperamental technology that does not belong in our homes. It just doesn't. I mean, I love my solar lights. I love the ones that flicker like a candle. I love them. But fire hazards, I'm not cool with fire hazards. But this goes back to this feels good. It doesn't work. It doesn't work. And while we're on the subject, the other day I was driving home and I drove past all of the apartment buildings that are being built in my area. And I commented to my wife about, all the electricity that they use in that entire apartment complex times 4 is what drives our electric rates up. Ask the people who live near these data centers. The more electricity we use, the scarcer it becomes, the more expensive it becomes. We are, especially here in California, running headlong into just an absolute bramble of razor blades, and we are going to get cut up and die from 1,000 little cuts. We need to pull back and reassess what's going on. The mayor of San Francisco right now is doing just that. He realizes his city's in trouble, and the only way to fix it is to start over. And I think that's what we need to do. We certainly do not need electric vehicles consuming more and more electricity. We do not need these batteries that are so easily corrupted out there on the market. And what we really don't need is people supporting Iran. You can support the Iranian people, but you cannot support the Islamic Revolution that runs that place. Whether you like Trump or not, he's doing the right thing. And, it would be nice if some people just kind of realized it's an ugly world, and sometimes it takes ugly solutions. I'm Kid Copious on Purple State Party, and so are you. Love one another. Keep on grinding, and dance it out.